Hi, welcome back to chapter 3. In this video, we'll talk a little bit about the availability heuristic. Judgmental heuristics help us to make decisions quickly and easily, but as part of the automatic processing system, we are prioritizing efficiency over accuracy. This may be vital in our increasingly complicated world. With advances in technology and increased globalization, we have more opportunities and possibilities than ever before. Almost everything is customizable, from coffee to cars, making decisions more complex. Of course, this has advantages, but there is emerging research to suggest that people are feeling cognitively drained, overwhelmed by the decision-making process. And so we rely on judgmental heuristics to ease this burden. The first heuristic that we'll talk about is the availability heuristic, but let's take a step back. We, of course, make judgments based on the information available to us. If information is unavailable, then we can't be expected to use it, no matter how vital that information may be. If I asked you, is your neighbor a good person? You'll think about your experiences with your neighbor. Were they pleasant, friendly? If so, you say yes. But have you run a criminal background check on them? Maybe if you did, you would learn information that would change your answer. But as of right now, you don't have that information. And so you make the best decision you can using the information that you have. The availability heuristic predicts that judgments are biased by how easily and quickly we can call to mind or remember a piece of information. This heuristic is more easily demonstrated than explained. So let's look at our lab study. The results are depicted in the graph here, and we'll focus on this left-hand side of the graph. Researchers had people remember examples of their own past assertive behavior. Participants were randomly assigned to one of two versions of the task. Those assigned to version A were asked to think of 6 times in their past when they behaved assertively. Those in version B were asked to think of 12 times in their past when they behaved assertively. Then all were given a self-report measure in which they were asked to rate themselves on a scale from 1 to 7 how assertive they were, with 7 being more assertive. If we look at the graph, those who were in the 6th example condition rated themselves as significantly more assertive. The task that they were randomly assigned to, 6 versus 12 examples, had a significant effect on how they rated themselves. Their judgments, even when it came to self-judgments, were influenced by the ease with which they could readily access that information. So it's easier to think of 12 examples of anything than it is, it's easier to think of 6 examples of anything compared to 12 examples. So this is what we refer to as the availability heuristic. If we can easily bring something to mind, then we assume that it must be true or likely or prevalent. Now, we can imagine how this could be problematic if the accessibility of information in memory is not due to its truth, prevalence, or likelihood. If instead the accessibility of information is biased in some way, then the judgments based on the availability heuristic will be flawed. So think about our question here. Which is a more prevalent cause of death? Car crashes or stomach cancer, tuberculosis, or fire and flames? Researchers asked participants these types of questions, and we can see their results in the table here. So we see that 86% of participants reported that they thought that motor vehicle accidents were a more likely cause of death compared to stomach cancer. 77% said that they thought that fire and flames were more likely than tuberculosis. But if we look at the population statistics for the US, we find that stomach cancer is much more likely overall, almost twice as likely compared to, or sorry, over twice as likely compared to motor vehicle accidents. So it seems as though our participant reports of what is a more likely cause of death is not influenced by the actual population statistics, but it seems rather that they're influenced by the newspaper reports per year. And that makes more sense. What are we exposed to? What information do we have available to us? Well, it's the newspaper reports. So someone may think, well, I've read a lot of newspaper stories about motor vehicle accidents, or I see that in the news a lot. And so it must be that that's more likely. I've heard almost nothing about deaths due to stomach cancer or due to tuberculosis. And so they must not be very likely. We look at tuberculosis versus fire and flames. We see that the population statistics suggest that they're both about equal, both extremely unlikely. But if we look at the newspaper reports per year, we have 24 newspaper reports of fire and flames versus 0 for tuberculosis. If we look at motor vehicle accidents, we have 137 of motor vehicle accidents compared to stomach cancer. And so it's not the population statistics that is influencing the newspaper reports or the participant reports. If we think about, well, what is driving the newspaper reporting? Well, it's likely due to how sensational or attention grabbing the story is going to be. Their motivation is to sell newspapers. If you see on the front page the story about man dies of stomach cancer, that's very tragic, but it's not quite as sensational or exciting or emotional maybe as that 6-car pileup on I-20. And particularly if we think about the graphics, the photographs that are involved in those types of stories. And so we see that if our available information is biased in some way, then our judgments will be biased if they are based on this availability heuristic. And this can be incredibly important. If we think about here, this judgment of likely causes of death, that could dramatically influence the fears that we have. It could dramatically influence the type of preventative or protective actions that we engage in. What we perceive as likely or risky for us is what we are going to take steps and measures to try to prevent. And so this availability heuristic could lead people to focus on the wrong concerns. Maybe people are focusing too much on preventing fire and flames or motor vehicle accidents, and they should think a little bit more about things like stomach cancer. Now, for most of you, for your age group, statistically, you should be very worried about motor vehicle accidents and seem very cautious on the roadways. But this is to say that maybe there are other concerns and that we could be influenced by this availability heuristic. So check out the video on Canvas. I Know What You Did Last Summer of the Shark. If we look at other types of media bias, this may fuel people's concerns or fears of pit bull attacks. It has been noted that the breed of the dog is more likely to be mentioned if the dog attack involved a pit bull. And so you're likely to hear a news story or a headline like pit bull attacks jogger, but you're unlikely to hear something like lab mix attacks jogger. That in that case, instead, the headline would be dog attacks jogger. That any other breed is labeled as a dog attack, but if it's a pit bull, the breed is mentioned. And so this may lead people to potentially be overly fearful of pit bulls. Now, it is important to note that if you look at the population statistics of dog attacks, pit bulls are responsible for a disproportionate number of deadly attacks on humans. Of course, it's important to be cautious of any unknown dog that is behaving aggressively, not just pit bulls. And we should be mindful of the fact that not all pit bulls are going to be aggressive and that we are going to have some cute and cuddly pit bulls like we see here. It's just that potentially this focus on pit bull attacks may bias people against this particular breed of dogs, potentially. So check out the next video on the representativeness heuristic.